three bits of news maybe to deal with first. And the biggest, the most obvious, is Donald Trump's inauguration. He's already kicked off with tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Now he's talking about China. Britain is an unusually open economy. I think we're arguing about the numbers downstairs, but by some counts, 60% of trade equivalent to 60% of GDP. I suppose my question is, how vulnerable are we to this, especially given the fact that we've already come out of the European Union? One of you.
I'll start on trade.
Your trade.
Good morning, everyone. It's, going around Davos, making eye contact with all your trade ministerial counterparts, you can imagine what is on our minds, right, and the conversation. But I think, well, there's a few things on this. First of all, yes, the UK is a very globally orientated, trade-intensive economy. That is a good thing. That openness to the rest of the world will be championed by this government, and actually there are opportunities to expand on that. I think that's a unique selling point in terms of our relationship with the Gulf and the trade deal we're negotiating, our aspirations with India, the EU reset, hopefully maybe some things with the US that come out of this, the China engagement that you have kicked off, Chancellor. So, yes, there's a vulnerability there, but there's a strength that comes from that openness to the world as well, so let's recognise that. The second thing is, look, we understand there is a genuine analysis in the US that feels that the very big trade deficits in goods that the US has, both with the EU and with China, the sense of unfairness that is the proof point of, we understand that. We might disagree, but we'll engage with that. Now, you're right to say we are an incredibly globally orientated economy, but also we obviously don't have that trade, the US does not have that trade deficit on manufactured goods with the UK. Amusingly, I said this to the Cabinet last week, but the UK and the US actually believe we have a surplus with each other on goods because of asymmetric statistical quirks. So there's the basis for a conversation there as to the future. But, it will be a choppy time to be a trade minister. There's no doubt about that. But our job is to navigate through that. You don't get to pick the world as you want it to be. You get the world as it is. And I do believe, the unique pitch from the United Kingdom can be, first of all, a return to political stability, which we appreciate after the Brexit referendum has been challenging in the UK, but that's also relative to some other European countries as well. That pitch to openness, and then I know something you'll want to get into, which is the willingness of this new government to use its mandate, to use the opportunity we have to fundamentally improve the business and investor environment in the UK.
So can I come on to that straight away? Because another piece of news is overnight you got rid of the chairman of the Competition and Markets Authority, and people conceived that as being a pro-growth, pro-deregulation, because one of the things about Trump is, yes, business people at Davos are scared of his trade wars, but they do like the pro-growth, deregulatory side of Trump. Is this a sign of more things to come in terms of regulation?
Well, growth is the #1 mission of this new Labour government. 6 months in, we are building the foundations to deliver that strong growth that has eluded the UK for far too long, more than a decade of very slow, sluggish economic growth. And we want our regulators to be part of that growth mission. Now, of course, the regulators are independent, and the chair of the CMA decided to step down. But he recognised that this government have got a different strategic approach when it comes to regulation. And he recognised it was time for him to move on and make way for somebody who does share the mission and the strategic direction that this government are taking. So, look, we wrote, myself, Johnny, the Prime Minister, to all of the regulators. There's more than 100 regulators in the UK. We've written to all of them and said, what can you do to reorientate your organisation to regulate, not just for risk, and of course regulating for risk is important, but regulating for growth. I've done it with the financial services regulators. We've now done it with all of the regulators. And I've got to say, the responses we've had, a lot of them have been incredibly positive about things that they can do.
Would you, on financial services, you just mentioned that, would you ever consider ring fencing? We are unusual in Britain in the sense we've ring-fenced banks. We've said, look, you have to put your retail banks separate. In an era where Trump and other people are pushing ahead with deregulation on lots of fronts, is that an area you would also look? You just mentioned financial services.
We'll always keep an open mind about things. Already, since the election of President Trump, the PRA, prudential regulator, has pushed back the implementation for Basel III. So that was going to be January 2026. We've pushed that back for a year. We're ahead of the European Union in recognising that the world has changed, and so we've put back that date. I think that shows that our regulators are willing to be pragmatic, recognise the importance of attracting investment into the UK and not being out of kilter with our major trading partners and our major competitors. So I think you're already seeing that. We saw the letter from the Financial Conduct Authority to the government just last week about what they might be able to do to drive investment, drive growth in the UK, with a number of practical proposals. That's what this government wants to implement, practical things to make it easier to invest in Britain, make it easier to get things done in Britain, because that's how we drive growth.
There's a very good example of that, which is my third piece of news, which people are talking about, is the idea that next week, there's been a leak ahead of it, that you would say, go ahead with the third runway at Heathrow, go ahead with the expansion of Gatwick, maybe the bridge over the Thames as well. You know, that would be a sign you're prepared to take tough decisions that help growth.
We've already taken a number of big decisions on City Airport, on Stansted Airport, on a number of planning decisions that this government have called in that were on the desks of ministers in the previous government, on housing, on data centres, in the creative industries. I'm not going to sort of comment on speculation about what I may or may not say next week, but Johnny started with a sort of pitch that Britain is an open, trading, vibrant economy. We want to remain as such.
To use your example of taking tough decisions, if you push ahead with Heathrow, that might cause problems with Sadiq Khan, might cause problems with your colleague Ed Miliband from Environment.
This is the problem with the last government.
Yeah, exactly.
There was always somebody that said, oh yes, of course we want to grow the economy, but we don't like that investment, or we don't like that wind farm, we don't like those pylons, we don't like that airport, we don't want that housing near us. The answer can't always be no. And that's been the problem in Britain for a long time, that when there was a choice between something that would grow the economy and sort of anything else always won. Now, of course, there are other things that matter, but when we say that growth is the #1 mission of this government, we mean it, and that means it trumps other things. And so we're making pro-growth decisions in the national interest.
I feel, John, as well, I genuinely feel there is, in the UK and perceptions of the UK, at the minute, people haven't quite recognised how resolved this group of people in the new cabinet in the UK are to make these decisions to make a difference, right? And I know that the proof points of that are not what we say or what strategies we publish, but the kind of decisions that we seek to make. But when Rachel says growth is the #1 mission, you know, that's about attracting private capital to the UK. That's about getting things done more quickly. There are things we know the UK needs. I mean, look, we could all tell stories of UK infrastructure that, you know, there's a famous example of the M6 toll was sort of initiated under the Callaghan government, delivered by the Blair Labour government. You know, I mean, we've got to do things quicker and better. And I think people don't yet quite appreciate how resolved we are to do that.
Isn't that, I mean, to come to the point, isn't that to do with, in some ways, the budget? I mean, if you talk to people here, they will come up with a variety of complaints. They'll talk about fiscal headroom, which we'll come back to. But their basic point with the budget was they thought that came across as something that was not in favour of wealth creation. You know, at the heart of it, it had big pay rises for public sector workers, paid for big taxes on business. And that is the main thing when you wander around the halls of Davos, you just come back from New York, that you seem to have started on the foot of being people who are not pro-business. So it's not just to do with these past decisions to do with Conservatives, it's to do with that particular thing with the budget. And do you wish you'd done things differently there?
When I became Chancellor, there was this £22 billion gap between what the previous government were bringing in revenues this year and what they were spending. It wasn't some years in the future, it was an in-year gap that hadn't been disclosed to the independent forecasters, hadn't been disclosed to Parliament You had an idea of it because if you looked at the monthly borrowing numbers, every month it was coming in a billion or two above what the independent forecaster had suggested the government would be borrowing on a monthly basis. But until we were elected, we did not know the scale of that inheritance. Now, I said during the election campaign that I would never play fast and loose with the public finances. Liz Truss did that, the previous government did that, and it caused untold damage in terms of borrowing costs and confidence in the UK. So I had to get a grip of the public finances, and that did mean difficult decisions, actually, on welfare, on spending, and on taxation to get the public finances under control. And I strongly believe, and I think businesses instinctively know this too, that stability is the prerequisite for economic growth. You can't grow an economy unless you have that stability. So we've now wiped the slate clean under the sort of economic and fiscal mismanagement of the previous government. It did require difficult decisions. I'm not immune to the challenges posed by the increases in tax. But let's look at the alternative. The alternative was that I did half measures, and then everyone would know that I'd have to come back for more next year, or I swept things under the carpet and pretend those problems didn't exist, but they would reassert themselves at some stage. What businesses can know is that our public finances are now in order. We're never going to have to come back again and do a budget like that. So we have the stability upon which we can now build as a government and as a country.
There's a limit, though, how much you can blame back on the Tories. I don't think anyone here regrets the Tories going. But you look at the numbers. The British Chambers of Commerce said that British business confidence is its lowest ebb since Liz Truss's mini-budget. 2/3 are worried about tax. Half say they'll have to raise prices. Firms are already cutting back on investment and employment. The British economy is actually smaller now than when the Tories left.
You've given the bad news. Let me tell you two pieces of good news. PwC survey that came out on Monday, whilst you were here in Davos, showed that we are second to the UK as the place to invest for global CEOs. That is the first time in 28 years to the US. It's the first time in 28 years that Britain has been in that position. That is good news and is a vote of confidence in the UK. The IMF forecast that came out last Friday revised up growth for the UK this year and puts us top of the pack of the major European economies. So we can trade surveys and data, but, you know, I'm here to sell Britain, to talk about the strengths and what we are doing. We're reforming the planning system, we're reforming our regulatory system, reforming pensions, and also this year we're going to be publishing an immigration white paper. And although we know that we need to bring immigration down, particularly illegal immigration into the UK, we are going to look again at routes for the highest skilled people, visas particularly in areas like AI and life sciences, because Britain is open for business. We are open for talent. We've got some of the best universities, some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, but we also want to bring in global talent into Britain.
There's no complacency by any of us. I would say the challenge of our inheritance has made us even more resolved to do those things that Rachel has described, because we wanted to do them, we thought they were essential. I think that case is even more compelling as a result of what we have inherited. It comes back to this. People should not doubt how resolved we are to make a difference. It's not just about the economic performance and what it means for our constituents. Of course, that's important. It's also about, to be honest, the legitimacy of the political system, showing people that, you know, government can make a difference to their lives, avoiding some of the populist pressures which are evident and discussed quite widely at an event like this. We know what's at stake, and that's why we're going to deliver.
Do you, on this issue, which you hear again and again from people here, this issue of wealth creation, I just saw Tony Blair walking on the street. He was famously relaxed about wealth creators getting wealthier. You listen to people here, they'll say taxes on business, taxes on wealth, taxes on school fees. You've got small businesses spending all their time now worrying about inheritance tax. Non-DOMs complain, say you're Rachel Leaves, not Rachel Reeves, because they're all heading abroad. The record of left-of-centre governments that are unpopular with business or start on the wrong terms with business is not a good one. You think of François Hollande in France. You know, there is a problem there, and beyond sort of announcing some things around the edge, what are you going to do to change that idea that is out there at the moment, that you're not in favour of wealth creation? Maybe you can correct that now. Look, are you relaxed about wealth creation?
Absolutely, and we want, as I just said, the best talent, the best people to come to Britain, create jobs in Britain to grow our economy. We had an international investment summit 2 months into the Labour government, £63 billion of inward investment into the UK, primarily in AI and in clean energy. That is incredibly exciting and shows the strengths that we have as an economy. I'm not going to apologise for the budget because although I hear criticism, what I don't hear is any real alternatives. If you're a CEO or a CFO and you're coming into a new business and you've got these massive problems with your finances, you have to stabilise them. And that requires difficult decisions. But if you don't make those decisions, you're going to be plagued by them for years to come. So we have now wiped the slate clean. Businesses can be confident of that. My instinct is to have lower taxes, less regulation, make it easier for businesses to do business. But unless you can have that economic and fiscal stability, then, to be honest, I think that you're not going to have any serious plan for economic growth. We saw that under the previous government. We've seen that governments around the world that get into financial difficulty. We have avoided that through the difficult decisions that we've made. But on every other area, I think businesses will say, on regulation, on planning, on pensions, on capital markets reform, that we are doing the things that are needed to unlock economic growth.
I'm going to come back to the issues of other things you could do in a second with Johnny, but first with you, this particular issue of stability and the issue, as you know, about fiscal headroom. You know, you left yourself a very small kind of buffer. I looked at 0.3% of GDP, or to put it another way, that's $9.9 billion, £9.9 billion against total public spending of more than 1.3 trillion. So very little margin for error. You've seen all those moves in the bond markets, which you'll point out have been corrected, but each time that happens, it kind of pushes through the buffer. You know, are you at some point going to have to make a bigger buffer at some time?
I set out the two fiscal rules that this government will meet. The first is that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. Previous government didn't achieve that in 14 years, and that we would bring debt down as a share of GDP. We meet those rules 2 years early. We meet both of those in year 3 of the forecast at the moment. And in the final year of the forecast, there's a £9.9 billion amount of headroom. That is more headroom than we inherited from the previous government. We actually put more money into increasing that
theirs was a famously small amount as well.
Yeah, so it's tight. And those fiscal rules are important to us because they are the sort of bedrock and foundation of that stability that I've spoken about. So we will continue to make decisions to ensure that we meet those fiscal rules. I'll just say another thing about the fiscal rules and why we chose to pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. That is so important for this government, to get a grip of day-to-day spending, because that allows us to free up money to invest in capital infrastructure projects, whether that is energy or transport or in tech, compute capability, for example. And we're only able to unlock £100 billion during the course of this Parliament for those capital projects, additional £100 billion, because this government are getting a grip of day-to-day spending. And some of you would have heard our Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, and our Science and Innovation Secretary, Peter Kyle, yesterday speak about the possibilities that tech have to transform our public services, to get better value for the money that we put into them by using tech better. The creation of a government digital app that will have our driving licences on and other things by the end of this year, using tech to cut out some of the costs in the back office functions of government. The more costs we can take out, the less we have to do on the tax side, the better services we will deliver for citizens, and the more we can free up to invest in that capital, the projects that can help transform our economy.
It sounds as if you're going down the same route as Elon Musk with his Department of Government Efficiency.
Well, look, we want to root out waste in government spending. I think maybe the
first comparison you've had
there. Not going to go troll President.
Just one last thing on that fiscal headroom. You've got Office of Budget Responsibilities, forecast updates at the end of March, March 26th. I suppose my question is, can you leave it that long? If you're riding a bicycle and you hit the curb twice, you tend to move a bit closer to the centre of the road, don't you? You've already had 2 instances where the sheer rise in borrowing costs, which occasionally happens, could have wiped out that buffer. Isn't that something you're going to have to deal with eventually?
Well, there's been undoubtedly global movements in financial markets this year, mainly driven by the US, but of course the UK gets caught in those headwinds. The Office of Budget Responsibility are just starting their forecast process, and they don't take into account just 1 week's moves in financial markets. They look at a period of time. But I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. There's a couple of months before that OBR forecast is published. I will respond to that in the proper way and make sure that we continue to meet those fiscal rules.
Johnny, can I kind of come to you on the issue of growth again? It strikes me, you look at a lot of the things you've been talking about, that the Chancellor's been talking about, planning reform, infrastructure strategy, pensions reform, making regulators more friendly. Those are quite kind of long-term things, whilst what business is looking for desperately is something short-term to make up for the tax rises. Is there anything you particularly can sort of focus on there?
I would come back a little bit on that, John, because I think what business wants to fundamentally see from us is, are we good for our word? When we say growth's the mission, how are we going to prove that? How are we going to convince people that that is absolutely where our political priorities will lie? Exactly as Rachel has said, they've heard from other people, other governments in the past. They want to know when you get that countervailing pressure, well, but what about this? What about that? What about that person not liking it? Are we going to say, no, this is the mission and this is the imperative? And we are. So I don't think it's about people just banking the long term, because the one thing the UK has needed in the last few years is more of a long-term, serious focus. Let's be frank. We've been bobbing along from one Prime Minister to the next, sometimes month to month, right? So they want that long-term focus. And I think that's where you get the confidence. If people do not look at the UK, they risk missing out, right? That's genuinely the case, because this is a government so resolved to make the difference, because we know that is what we have to do. So I don't think it's a question of, okay, people think the long term's great, they want the short term. They want to see that long term following through and the commitment that comes with that. And then they will see when, some of the pressures, some of the conversations about the global trading position, the leadership role the UK will take in terms of open markets being a key part of that. I mean, as we both said, we want to stress, we recognise the challenge of our inheritance and how we've got to provide people with the confidence and the certainty for the future. It is important to say we're still, you benchmark, payroll taxation in the UK still very internationally competitive. Capital gains tax, corporation tax lowest in the G7 with the best allowances available. So there's a compelling competitive offer there. But what you need, I think, to generate that confidence is people recognising this is a government serious about building.
Surely the single thing that you could do that would give the most amount of growth is to do a fresh deal with Europe. To do something like a customs union. That's what virtually every number that people have run on that shows the biggest increase in GDP compared with all the other things you're talking about.
It's first of all, will this debate ever end? I mean, I
didn't say rejoining the European Union. I said something akin to a customs union.
I would say something like this. That first of all, we want, and again, there's a high degree of ambition on our side, a reset of that relationship with Europe. And there's a whole range of specific elements to that, the SPS proposals, the recognition of mutual recognition of qualifications, the regulation of goods in particular. We're up for an ambitious conversation about that. I do think, again, people sometimes fail to recognise that, the problems, evident problems, the challenges of leaving the European Union for the UK were obviously about a significant change in our terms of trade, but the political uncertainty that came with that was also a real problem. And so our decision to not relive, not to refight those arguments, but to focus on improving that relationship, practical things, as well as build those relationships with the Gulf, with India, maybe the US, look at how we've been an outlier in terms of our lack of engagement with China, how can we turn some of that around, difficult but important to do. And I think that is a much more comprehensive approach. And I think you've got to recognise, if you're, as we have done, leaving something like the single market, there's a cost there, you have to mitigate that, But I think a conversation just about Europe, honestly, it's not enough in its own right to give the UK the platform it
Do you
needs.
see yourself, Chancellor, in competition with Europe to some extent? You have a lot of international business people here. Somebody yesterday said that Britain's claim to fame is we could be the tallest tree in a not very tall forest, which was Europe. You look and see what's happened to Germany. You look and see what's happening in France at the moment. Do you see yourself in competition with Europe for international capital?
Of course, we want jobs and investment to come to Britain. We're here to represent the UK and all of our strengths. And look, you know, Johnny and I both voted to remain in the European Union, but we're outside the European Union. We have been for, it'll be 9 years this summer. We've got to move on. There are opportunities outside of the European Union. Opportunities, for example, in AI, where we have a very different regulatory approach to AI compared to the European Union's approach. That makes Britain a more attractive place for AI and tech companies to invest than in other European countries. We should take advantage of that. We should shout about it, and we should get that investment in. Just in the 6 months that we've been in office, £40 billion of private investment into AI and tech into the UK. That's really exciting. I think some of that has come to the UK because you look at the UK compared to other jurisdictions and we are a better place to invest. Take, for example, the Basel reforms. As I said, we've gone ahead of other European countries. We have that flexibility. We can be more nimble. We are taking advantage of that. That said, I was the first British Chancellor to go to the Eurogroup meeting of finance ministers in December in Brussels. We do want a reset of our relations. We don't want the antagonism and the battles that the previous government seemed to quite relish. It's why also I went to Beijing and Shanghai last weekend to re-engage there, the first economic and financial dialogue between our two countries for nearly 6 years. Got tangible benefits, particularly for financial services, quotas and licences for British businesses doing business in China. So we are re-establishing ourselves in the global space, getting good deals for Britain, and that's what our jobs are, and that's what we're doing.
You talked earlier about making government more efficient. We made the joke about Elon Musk, but there was a point behind that. One of the complaints that business people had about your budget, there was this very large pay rises going out to the health and things like that, but without a kind of attached bits of reform with that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to make government more efficient, you'd like to see more evidence that that's actually beginning to happen.
Let's just remember where we were on the NHS when we came into government. Right? There had been so many strikes that was having a detrimental impact on business as well as individuals. Because when people are waiting months and months, sometimes years, to get the appointments and the procedures and the operations that they need, they're not available for work. We've got a problem in Britain that participation in the labour market is lower than it was going into the pandemic. We've got to sort that out. Some of that is about reforming the benefits system. We're going to do that. And some of it is about making our National Health Service work better. I don't think there's a business person that would have said 7 months ago before we came into office, you know, everything's fine with the National Health Service and making sure we've got a healthy labour market. That was a problem, and we fixed it by resolving that industrial action that had plagued our National Health Service for a long period of time. But, you know, Wes Streeting, our Health Secretary, is absolutely reforming the National Health Service, making more use of the private sector, for example, more drop-in clinics local to where people live, using technology better so that people can choose when and where they have their appointments. So we are absolutely using reform alongside making sure that we resolve that industrial action. Another area where there's massive opportunity in the NHS, going back to this issue around tech and data, is using data in the NHS to bring in money, but also to make Britain the best place in the world to do clinical trials. Massive opportunities there because of our integrated health service.
Something you said earlier, I think the message you were trying to put across is that your first priority is going to be to sort out spending now. Now you've got everything, hopefully, on a firm thing. You're going to sort out spending before remotely thinking about the chance of more taxes or anything like that. And if you would actually also like to cut taxes in the future?
I would like taxes to be lower on people and on businesses, but I'm not going to play fast and loose with the public finances, because in the end, you actually don't result in anyone being better off, because it sends interest rates soaring if you lose control of the public finances. So I'm not going down that route. But if we can run the state better, if we can run public services better, if we can bring investment into the UK and grow the economy, we don't have to keep ratcheting up taxes to make the sums add up. That's where I would like to be, but we're not in that place yet.
But is there a certain level of growth, a certain level of something where you think you would then feel happier about reducing taxes again?
Well, look, I would like to reduce the burden of taxes, but I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. Previous governments here and around in the UK and around the world make promises they can't keep. I'm not going to be that sort of Chancellor. We're not going to be that sort of government. But I think you can see my instincts is to do everything I can to make Britain a great place to do business and to invest. As Venkat from Barclays, I think, was saying yesterday, there's huge potential in the UK. We're just 6 months in as a government. We are taking the steps that are necessary to grow the economy. Can't turn everything around overnight, but I think people can see in all of the reform that we're driving forward that we are determined to turn around the low growth performance that has dogged Britain for too long now.
And I would just say on that, I mean, from my perspective as a government department, I'm absolutely convinced we could spend money as a country in a better way. You know, our industrial strategy is partly about coordinating government policy across a whole range of departments. I look at how we've done that as a country in the past. Did we get the effectiveness of that? You know, when we look at the different regulatory burdens in different departments, who considers the aggregate burden on business? I'm convinced we could do that. And we know, the media always want to know, you're going to spend more or less on something, or regulation more or less of it. It's not that. You know, it's about the proportionality of those things, the effectiveness of that. And we're up for that conversation, because that's how we'll make the biggest difference.